Iran Daily Briefing. Tuesday, March 31, 2026. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says U.S. war objectives against Iran will be achieved in weeks. He also said in a separate statement that those objectives can be met without ground operations. Meanwhile, an American amphibious assault ship carrying nearly 1,800 Marines is operating in the Indian Ocean. Today, we'll lay out what each of those statements means, where they came from, and what to watch for next. Pakistan offered to host talks between Washington and Tehran on March 29th. Trump made public statements about potential deals that same weekend, even as strikes on Iran continued through March 30th. That is the through line of today's episode. A conflict that is simultaneously escalating militarily and producing the first visible diplomatic signals. Today you'll hear about Trump's threats to Iran's oil infrastructure, rising oil prices, a tanker fire in Dubai, an Iranian threat to disrupt Gulf shipping, and what Rubio's statements on the timeline and scope of US operations actually say. And don't say. The central development today comes from two separate statements by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and it's important to keep them distinct because they came from different sources. The first, in an exclusive interview with Al Jazeera, Rubio said US war objectives against Iran would be achieved in, quote, weeks. Al Jazeera is the source for that claim, and it carries a confidence rating in the mid to upper 60s. Solid for single-source reporting in an active conflict environment, but still single source. The second statement. France 24 reports that Rubio separately said US objectives in Iran could be met without ground operations. France 24 is the source for that claim. Whether this came from the same Al Jazeera interview or a different occasion, today's reporting does not confirm. The two statements are being reported through different outlets, and we're presenting them that way. Taken together, the picture Rubio is drawing is of a war with a defined near-term timeline that stops short of a land invasion. That is a significant public framing, regardless of what the operational reality is. It sets an expectation, and expectations, once set publicly, create accountability. Now, here is what complicates that picture directly. The New York Times has confirmed, according to France 24, that hundreds of US commandos have arrived in the Middle East as part of a military buildup. France 24 also reports that the US military had already built up what it describes as the largest American force in the Middle East in more than 20 years prior to those additional troops arriving. And Middle East Eye reports, citing US Central Command, that the USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship carrying approximately 1,800 Marines from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, is currently operating in the Indian Ocean. We're presenting those facts alongside Rubio's statements. Rubio said ground operations are not required. US Central Command has confirmed the USS Tripoli's position and composition. Both are facts in today's reporting. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Khalibaf addressed this directly. GlobalSecurity.org reports that on March 29th, Khalibaf stated the United States is, quote, publicly transmitting messages about negotiations while secretly planning a ground operation. That is Tehran's stated position. Washington has not, in today's reporting, formally responded to that specific characterization. On the Iranian side, the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's elite military force, has been releasing its own claims. GlobalSecurity.org reports that on March 29th, the IRGC announced it used a Shahed 136 drone, costing approximately $20,000, in an attack it claims damaged a Boeing E-3 Sentry surveillance aircraft, valued at approximately $700 million. The IRGC released that cost comparison alongside its strike claims. NPR reports that at least 2 US E-3 Sentry aircraft were damaged in an Iranian missile and drone attack in Saudi Arabia, and that more than a dozen US service members were injured in that same attack. The US and Israel, for their part, pressed ahead with strikes on March 30th. France 24 reports that attacks continued even as ceasefire talks showed signs of progress. Israel's military struck targets in Tehran. Iran's the IRGC said it hit an industrial complex in southern Israel. AFP-verified footage, reported by Al Monitor, showed at least 2 massive explosions and columns of smoke in Isfahan. That city, Al Jazeera reports, has a population of 2.3 million. France 24's correspondent Reza Sayah, reporting from Tehran, said airstrikes have been knocking out power in parts of the Iranian capital since the Sunday before this Tuesday. Multiple explosions rocked Tehran on Tuesday, with news agencies reporting power outages in parts of the city. And Iran's air defense forces shot down a US MQ-9 drone, according to Middle East Eye, citing Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency. Global Security Org separately reports an MQ-9 was downed in the eastern vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz on March 29th. One more item that sits inside this story. Spanish news, reported by Al Jazeera, indicates Spain has closed its airspace to US warplanes involved in the war on Iran. That is a notable diplomatic signal from a NATO member, though Al Jazeera is the sole source for that claim. What to watch? Whether Rubio's weeks statement generates a formal response from Tehran, and whether the two statements, on timeline and on ground operations, are reconciled in any official US readout or press briefing in the next 24 hours. Story 1. Karg Island, oil prices and Trump's threats. The most direct economic pressure point in this conflict right now is Karg Island. France 24 reports it handles nearly 90% of Iranian crude exports and is Iran's primary oil export hub. On March 29th, globalsecurity.org reports, Trump said he wants to, quote, take the oil in Iran and could seize Karg Island. That statement came from globalsecurity.org, which is a single source at a confidence level just above 60%. Treat it accordingly. Then, on March 30th, Trump escalated further. France 24 reports that Trump threatened to destroy Karg Island along with Iran's oil wells and power plants unless Tehran quickly accepted a peace deal. France 24 also reports Trump suggested US troops could seize Karg Island. These are France 24's reports, sourced separately from the March 29th globalsecurity.org item. 2 different days, 2 different outlets at somewhat different confidence levels. The trajectory across both days is one of escalating threat language directed at Iran's oil infrastructure. France 24 reported that oil prices surpassed $110 a barrel, alongside reporting about Pentagon planning related to Karg Island. At the same time, Trump said on March 30th, again per France 24, that a deal with Tehran could be made fairly quickly, and that the US was in, quote, serious discussions with what he called a more reasonable regime in Tehran. France 24's Reza Sayah reported from Tehran on March 30th that Iranian authorities do not take Trump's statements seriously. Trump also stated, per France 24, that Iran had agreed to let 20 ships through the Strait of Hormuz. China confirmed, also per France 24, that 3 Chinese ships were allowed to transit the strait in recent days. Separately, France 24 reports that Iran threatened to disrupt shipping in the Bab al-Mandab Strait, the waterway that links the Gulf of Aden to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, with the help of its Houthi allies in Yemen. Al Jazeera reports that the Iran war has already wiped $120 billion off Dubai and Abu Dhabi stock markets. South Korean President Myung, per Al Jazeera, vowed what was described as a maximum response to an energy crisis prompted by the conflict. What to watch? Whether Trump's threat language toward Karg Island produces any verifiable change in Iranian negotiating posture, and whether oil prices continue to move in response to Pentagon-related reporting. Story 2. The tanker attack and shipping pressure. Multiple sources report an attack on a Kuwait-flagged crude oil tanker in or near Dubai. Here is what each source says and where they diverge. France 24 reports that an Iranian attack on a Kuwait-flagged oil tanker at Dubai port on a Tuesday caused a fire but no injuries or oil spill, citing Emirati authorities. Al Jazeera, Middle East, reports that a drone attack sparked a fire on a Kuwaiti tanker in the UAE amid reported Iranian attacks across the Gulf, and that Dubai authorities confirmed the fire was contained with no oil leakage or injuries. Al Jazeera separately reports it as an Iranian attack on a Kuwait-flagged oil tanker at Dubai port on a Tuesday. Those accounts are broadly consistent. Al Monitor introduces a complication. It reports that Iran attacked and set ablaze the Kuwait-flagged crude oil tanker Al Salmi off Dubai on, quote, Monday, March 31st. Today is Tuesday, March 31st, 2026. Al Monitor's own labeling of March 31 as a Monday is itself an apparent error in the source. March 31st, 2026 is a Tuesday. This date inconsistency further complicates the timeline picture, and we cannot resolve it from today's available reporting. What is consistent across sources? A Kuwait-flagged tanker caught fire in or near Dubai. Emirati authorities confirmed no injuries and no oil spill. The fire was contained. The broader shipping picture: Iran has threatened, per France 24, to disrupt traffic through the Bab al-Mandab Strait, the waterway connecting the Gulf of Aden to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, using Houthi allies in Yemen. China confirmed 3 of its ships transited the Strait of Hormuz recently. Iran, according to Trump's statement reported by France 24, agreed to let 20 ships through. What to watch? Whether additional tanker incidents are reported in the Gulf in the next 24 hours, and whether Iran follows through on its stated threat regarding the Bab al-Mandab. Story 3. Nuclear facilities struck. Paris plot. Suspected 2 items that are lower in volume today but significant in substance. First, the nuclear picture. GlobalSecurity.org reports that Iran's heavy water reactor at Kondab, near the city of Arak, was attacked on March 27th. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the UN's nuclear watchdog, confirmed on March 29th that the reactor had been knocked out of commission. That confirmation matters. It moves the Kondab strike from a claim to a verified fact, per the IAEA reporting cited by GlobalSecurity.org. Also on March 29th, per GlobalSecurity.org, Isfahan University of Technology was struck for a second time in a week. The Deputy Chancellor of the university, Akbar Salehi, was cited in reports about that second strike. Second, Paris. France 24 reports that French investigators suspect the Iranian state is behind an attempted attack on the Bank of America in Paris on March 29th. France's Minister of the Interior, per France 24, suspects the attack was carried out by intermediaries acting on behalf of the IRGC. 3 suspects, all minors, were taken into police custody. These are suspicions, not confirmed charges, but the involvement of France's Interior Minister indicates this is being treated at a senior level. Al Monitor also reports that US-Israeli strikes damaged the Husseiniya Azam religious site in Zanjan in Iran's northwest, including parts of the dome and minarets, citing Fars news agency. Middle East Eye reports the same, citing Fars. Iranian state media reporting is the source for that claim. What to watch? Whether the IAEA issues further statements on damage to Iranian nuclear sites, and whether French authorities file formal charges in the Paris case. In the cold open, we noted that Rubio made 2 separate statements, one on timeline, one on the scope of operations, and that they came from different sources. Here is the fuller picture. Al Jazeera is the source for Rubio's claim that war objectives would be achieved in weeks. France 24 is the source for Rubio's statement that those objectives could be met without ground operations. Both statements are in today's reporting. Neither has been contradicted by official US readouts available in today's intel. Against that, U.S. Central Command confirmed to Middle East Eye the presence of the USS Tripoli, an amphibious assault ship with approximately 1,800 Marines, in the Indian Ocean. France 24 confirmed, citing the New York Times, that hundreds of U.S. commandos have arrived in the Middle East, and the U.S. military had already built up what France 24 describes as its largest Middle East force in more than 20 years before those arrivals. Those are the facts as sourced today. The gap between a stated policy of no ground operations and the confirmed positioning of amphibious and commando forces is visible in today's reporting. We are not resolving that gap. Today's sources don't resolve it, but it is the central factual tension that listeners should carry into tomorrow's briefing. Several concrete items to track over the next 24 to 48 hours. Pakistan's mediation offer. France 24 reports Pakistan said on March 29th that it would soon host talks between the US and Iran. That offer has not, in today's reporting, produced a confirmed meeting or a response from either Washington or Tehran. Pakistan's offer is the only third-party mediation channel mentioned in today's available reporting. Watch for any acceptance, rejection, or counter-proposal from either side. Trump's Karg Island threats. Trump made escalating statements on March 29th and March 30th regarding Karg Island. No military action against Karg Island has been reported in today's intel. Whether those threats translate into operational orders or remain public pressure is one of the most consequential open questions right now. The USS Tripoli. U.S. Central Command confirmed the ship's position in the Indian Ocean. Watch for any change in its reported location or operational status. Rubio's statements on timeline. The weeks claim and the no ground operations statement are now on the record. Any official U.S. clarification, qualification, or contradiction of either statement would be significant. Iran's response posture. France 24's Tehran correspondent reported on March 30th that Iranian authorities do not take Trump's statements seriously. Iranian Parliament Speaker Kalibaf accused Washington of negotiating publicly while planning a ground operation privately. Watch for any formal Iranian government statement in response to either Rubio's timeline claim or Trump's Karg Island threats. Oil markets. Prices surpassed $110 a barrel, per France 24, alongside Pentagon planning reports related to Karg Island. Any further reporting on U.S. military planning near that facility would be a market-moving development. The Paris investigation. French authorities have 3 suspects in custody in connection with the attempted Bank of America attack. Formal charges or an official government-to-government statement from Paris toward Tehran would mark a significant escalation in the diplomatic dimension of this conflict. Today's briefing covered Secretary of State Rubio's separate statements on war timeline and ground operations, Trump's escalating threats against Karg Island, rising oil prices, a tanker fire in Dubai, Iran's threat to disrupt Bab al-Mandab shipping, the IAEA confirmation of the Kondab reactor being knocked out, and suspected Iranian involvement in a Paris bombing plot. We'll be back tomorrow with the next developments as they emerge. If you found today's briefing valuable, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. New episodes every morning.